Rejoice together, for the time we are living in is the time for reclaiming our own. Brothers, listen to me.
Did you know that guys walk here? Did you know guys walk here?
Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at. Welcome to On Deck Live. So we apologize if you missed us last week, but we are here this week and we're ready to have some conversations. A couple of things on the agenda today. We want to talk about Memorial Day origins and the co-opting of Black culture, Black life. We want to talk about, is it possible to unite Black people globally? And we want to talk about what keeps us apart. Do Black men love Black women enough? If yes, what does that love look like? If no, what are the expectations? So before we get into our topics, I'm gonna let my colleagues introduce themselves, starting from the top.
What's up, everyone? It's Hanif Nelson. Glad to be here as always. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
All right.
Konnichiwa, everybody. My name is Robert Jones, and I'm begrudgingly a collaborator on this platform, and I am here today.
He's just trying to be the new Van Jones. It's all good.
Why I gotta be Van Jones? How come I can't be Kwame Brown?
My apologies to Van Jones. I think he's trying to be the new Black women. That's what it is.
You don't want none of Mama's cooking.
All right, y'all. Let's jump into it. This is the long weekend. It's Memorial Day weekend. And I remember when I was at Southern Connecticut, we had a professor by the name of Rob. You was there. You might now think he took any African history classes. Dr. Dennis Blau. I remember way back. Do you remember Dennis Blau as a professor?
No, I don't. I remember my European history professor though.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Talk to us about like the different holidays and celebrations, celebratory efforts that we have in America, and how a lot of them had like African American or Caribbean origins. One of the things he had talked about way back in the early 90s was Memorial Day. And he talked about what took place down in South Carolina. And it was the first official memorial celebration or memorial for American soldiers. So it's one of those things that took off. It morphed into a life of its own. And it's one of those things that they neglected to share with us. Well, at least they didn't share it with me down in Meriden, Connecticut, when I was in middle school or high school. I'm not sure if they talked about Memorial Day and its origins and it coming from Africans freed from captivity. Have you guys ever heard that before? What'd you hear, Hanif? I see you shaking the head like.
Well, I heard about it first from one of my sisters who, when I was younger, was really into, anything that was African studies. And as a young child, I really had no choice since she was watching me when my mom was at work to not hear this. And then I also was very fortunate that in high school, I had a really interesting situation in high school with some of my classes where we were allowed to challenge certain things, especially if we were researching things and kind of discuss it. So we had this conversation in one of my high school classes also.
We didn't have that conversation. How about you, Rob, up in New Hampshire? You guys have any I forgot. You had to challenge them on Hannibal.
Yeah, you couldn't challenge the teachers up there. And no, we never had conversations and discussions about it. I remember the only Black conversations that I had in school up there was when Martin Luther King, New Hampshire was fighting to keep Martin Luther King holiday from becoming a holiday. And there were a lot of Black people that got together and had conversations at someone's house. What can we do to help push this legislation in so it can be a holiday? But they were fighting hard against it.
So, as of late, the last couple of days, I know I posted something on Facebook talking about the history of Memorial Day, and someone had kind of hit me in my box, and they kind of challenged me on it, saying that I'm misrepresenting American history. So then they cited this particular site right here, and we can all read it together. It says the origin legend, the common misconception about Memorial Day is it was begun by freed slaves. There's no such thing as a freed slave. was begun by Africans freed from slavery to honor those who had died defending the Union in the Civil War. In May of 1865, African Americans in Charleston, South Carolina, reburied former Union prisoners of war and held a ceremony dedicating the cemetery to them. According to Snopes, well, that's in accordance to Snopes, while the day was meant to honor the men who gave their lives on the battlefield, it was not the origin of the Memorial Day holiday we observe today. They said in the spring of 1865, the Civil War finally ended after claiming more lives than any other conflict in U.S. history. To commemorate the lives lost in battle, Americans began holding tributes each spring, coincidentally, during the late 1860s. Note that the one in South Carolina took place in 1865. Remember that. They would decorate the graves of those who had died with flowers, leading to the day being referred to as Decoration Day. General John Logan, leader of an organization of Northern Civil War veterans, designated May 30th, 1868, note the date, as the first official Decoration Day with a strong speech on the importance of remembering those who had died defending the Union. The 30th of May, 1868 is designated for the purpose of strewing with flowers or otherwise decorating the graves of comrades who died in defense of their country during the late rebellion, and whose bodies now lie in almost every city, village, and hamlet churchyard in the land, he proclaimed. So that's pretty similar to what I learned when I was in high school. Again, it wasn't until Dr. Dennis Bell, may he rest in peace, shared that information with us back when I was in college taking a Black Studies course. So he made reference to a professor from Yale University at the time. And I remember we had to read the speech, we had to write papers on it and everything, which is pretty cool. I learned a lot during that. So I'm going to share, I found a video of this professor. I'm going to share this video with everyone.
The 1st Union Regiment that marched up Meeting Street in Charleston was the 21st USCT, Colored Infantry, a black regiment, and they accepted the surrender of the city from its mayor. And then they began to hold ceremonies, the black folks of Charleston. They began to hold ceremonies all around the city. They held a parade in late March, or was it early April of '65. They had this huge parade where they had 2 floats, and they had, on one float they had a little slave auction occurring, a mock slave auction with a woman with her baby being sold away. And on the next float they had a coffin labeled slavery, and it said, Fort Sumter dug its grave, April 12th, 1861. And then they planned one more ceremony. And by the way, the war, when it finally ended, they held an extraordinary ceremony on Fort Sumter. They crammed about 3,000 people onto the little island. All kinds of dignitaries came. Now General Anderson, not the colonel who had surrendered the fort 4 years ago, came and raised the U.S. flag. 4 years almost to the day he had taken it down. William Lloyd Garrison was there from the North, the great abolitionist who wept uncontrollably when he heard a small black children's choir sing John Brown's Body. And the very night of that ceremony, which was the 14th of April, they held a banquet of a sort in a building that had a roof on it back in Charleston. And that was the very night, of course, that Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater in Washington. But the black folks of Charleston had planned one more ceremony. That ceremony was a burial ceremony. It turns out that during the last months of the war, the Confederate Army turned the Planters' horse track, a race course, it was called the Washington Race Course, into an open-air prison. And in that open-air prison, in the infield of the horse track, about 260-odd Union soldiers had died of disease and exposure. And they were buried in unmarked graves in a mass gravesite out behind the grandstand of the racetrack. And by the way, there was no more important and symbolic site in low-country planter slaveholding life than their racetrack. Well, the black folks of Charleston got organized. They knew about all this. They went to the site. They reinterred all the graves, the men. They couldn't mark them with names. They didn't have any names. And they made them proper graves. And they built a fence all the way around this cemetery, about 100 yards long and 50, 60 yards deep, and they whitewashed the fence. And over an archway, they painted the inscription, Martyrs of the Race Course. And then on May 1st, 1865, they held a parade of 10,000 people on the racetrack, led by 3,000 black children carrying armloads of roses and singing John Brown's Body. Followed then by black women, then by black men. It was regimented this way. Then by contingents of Union infantry. Everybody marched all the way around the racetrack. As many as could fit got into the gravesite. 5 black preachers read from Scripture. A children's choir sang the national anthem, America the Beautiful, and several spirituals. And then they broke from that and went back into the infield of the racetrack and did essentially what you and I do on Memorial Day. They ran races, they listened to 16 speeches by one count, and the troops marched back and forth and they held picnics. This was the first Memorial Day. African Americans invented Memorial Day in Charleston, South Carolina. There are 3 or 4 cities in the United States, north and south, that claim to be the site of the first Memorial Day, but they all claim 1866. They were too late. I had the great, blind, good fortune to discover this story in a messy, totally disorganized collection of veterans' papers at the Houghton Library at Harvard some years back. And what you have there is black Americans recently freed from slavery announcing to the world with their flowers and their feet and their songs what the war had been about. What they basically...
All right. So what do you guys think about Dr. Blight's words?
Man, it's like they continually try to rewrite history all the time. It's just amazing, and you see like the attack. There's a huge attack on that critical race theory. A lot of white people are attacking that because it brings to light all just what we're talking about right here, but on a more broader spectrum. I think it's in Wellesley, Massachusetts. There's a school in Wellesley that created an affinity area for students of people of color who can go and just have it as a safe space. And parents in that school system are suing the school district because they're saying that it's racist. Man.
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting to me, when you hear his words. It's like one of the things, like, because when it comes to academia, especially the world of academia, we exalt a lot of the Ivy League schools. So to hear an Ivy League professor from one of the nation's top schools that so many people are trying to get into every year make this statement and say that he found some of these papers at arguably one of the other top schools in the nation, one that's rivaling 1 and 2 in the Ivies, it kind of tells you that there's some study, there's some documentation, there's some things proving this. And for me, it's not new hearing this, but for some other people, it's like, well, what are you going to say now? One of your top scholars, for those of you that are white and don't believe this, one of your top scholars that looks just like you, and went to a library with some other scholars that look just like you, have come to the same conclusion.
Exactly.
So, what are you going to say now? I mean, the date's not lying. I mean, the date is very clear. The very first celebration of this type happened long before any of the recognized celebrations.
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
I was going to see if I could flash it while you were still talking. Yeah, you are absolutely right. So for folks who don't know, the very first memorial celebration took place in 1865. Now, fast forward. I think my camera's freezing. Fast forward to today. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Still
Vice President Kamala Harris. Let me see if I can share this. I just got to do it.
Here comes Mama's cooking.
Oh yeah. You know what? I don't think I can share it. I don't know what's happening with this thing right now, but I ain't gonna worry about it. It says Vice President Kamala Harris came under fire Saturday for tweeting about Memorial Day, but without mentioning the significance of the weekend. There it is, right there. A little late. Open that up.
Damn, am I gonna have to put my new glasses on?
Okay.
Sheesh.
All right. So of course this is Fox News. Vice President Kamala Harris but the thing is, Reddit, just about every major site has this article running right now. And if you see the title, it says Vice President Kamala Harris under fire for disrespectful tweet. Social media users remind the Vice President Memorial Days to remember fallen soldiers. It goes on to say Vice President Kamala Harris came on fire for saying enjoy the long weekend above a candid photo of herself smiling. Social media users condemned Harris's lack of tact, reminding the vice president of the sacrifices of the long week. The long weekend is meant to honor. Real misfire here is a long weekend. It is also Memorial Day weekend, which means far more that our government officials should acknowledge. The time to remember and honor the millions of Americans who lost their lives in our nation's defense. It's really interesting because it's like every year we hear them talking about patriots, and they talk about veterans, and then they're often talk down to us. And right now they're assuming that Kamala Harris is of African descent and she's African American. They assume that we wouldn't know anything about being patriotic, given the first celebratory effort for veterans of any war fought on American soil was conducted by Black people who had just been released from slave plantations. For those who don't know, African Americans have fought, and I'm reading, African Americans have fought for the United States throughout its history, defending and serving a country that in turn denied them their basic rights as citizens. Despite policies of racial segregation and discrimination, African American soldiers played a significant role from the colonial period to the Korean War. It wasn't until the middle of the 20th century that African American soldiers began to receive the recognition and equality that they deserved. My dad did two tours in Korea. Came back to Alabama, and along with every other Black soldier that came back wearing their uniform, the vast majority of them were pretty much chased out of Korea. So it's so interesting as people want to debate the history of Memorial Day, as they go in on, former President Barack Obama. They talk about Kamala Harris. When they talk about the NFL players who took a knee, everything they talked about was in reference to American soldiers, as if Black people had never fought in American wars. And it's just so interesting is not only did they co-opt a celebration, but they refuse to give those people credit. And I'm just kind of curious about what everybody's, how do people feel about that? I mean, this is America. It happens every day.
Well, I mean, first thing, if you want to talk about, we have to honor our fallen soldiers, we have to honor our veterans. We're not respecting, that if they're talking about Kamala Harris's tweet about being disrespectful, well, how about the disrespect you treat the veterans that are alive? How about the disrespect you treat them by, in my opinion, if you went and you fought if you were in any branch of this service, of this country, of this military, fighting for American freedom, defending American freedom, you should never be homeless. You should never be hungry. You should never be in a position where you have to worry about anything for the rest of your life. But meanwhile, we want to, those great Republicans in Congress who want to talk about we need to reverence our veterans are the same people that cut funding to Veterans Affairs, are the same people that make sure veterans don't have this lifetime health care, but make sure that they have it. So don't talk to me. First off, before you want to talk to me about our dead, veterans and honoring their memory, how about you actually do something for the living ones? Because they do more for the dead ones than the living ones. They do all these grand ceremonies. They make sure their graves are spotless. They make sure that they're buried with great honors. But how about you take care of the ones that are actually alive? So I don't really want to hear from anyone. I don't care who you are, white, black, purple, green, blue. I don't care what you are. If you want to talk about honoring, those people who fought for this country, and you're not willing to do anything to help those that are alive or well and that are alive and maybe not well and need help, you don't really have anything to say to me in the first place. Yeah. Like you, my dad fought in Korea, and my dad, I'll tell you a quick story. My dad fought in Korea, came back, became a police officer, and he was going to a conference I think he was telling me it was in South Carolina, and all the way he got stopped. him, and it was him, car full of black men, they're all police officers. They showed their badges, and the cop said to them, this is right after they got back from Korea. The cop said to him in North Carolina, "I don't care about no nigger cops."
Like Dred Scott all over again.
So my point in saying in this story and saying this is that don't talk about how we need to honor our veterans and remember those who have fallen when you don't even want to deal with the ones that are living.
And let's not forget that I think we're the only group of people that have fought in every single war for this country, even before it was really even titled or labeled a country. So, but I agree with you, Tani, from what you said. But it's Democrats and Republicans. It's just not Republicans doing that. It's just they're both parties are complicit in that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna just interrupt you for one second. Say the only reason why I specifically said Republicans because those are the ones that bark the loudest about disrespecting our country and disrespecting our veterans, while they're the ones like really propagating the disrespect. But I do agree with you that it is both of them.
Yeah. Yes, it is crazy, And the other thing I would add, no veteran should be without health care either. And I know people that work in VAs, and the treatment that the veterans get, the quality of care that they get is definitely subpar. But I'm fighting for my country, they say. I'm fighting for my country. But the country's not fighting back for them.
You look at what took place at the Soldiers' Home last year, at the peak of the pandemic, all of those former veterans who passed away due to COVID, and the irresponsibility of the administration that ran it, the lack of oversight for that facility for U.S. veterans. I agree, Hanif, it couldn't get any worse. You can go from town to town, area to area, and you will always find homeless veterans, poor, destitute, and left out on the streets. And I agree with you guys. I just think if we're going to celebrate that, if we're going to use the term patriot and always make reference to our soldiers, I think I think politicians and I think the American public itself should take heed. And I think also whenever they talk about Memorial Day, they talk about total strangers who took bullets and died in service for this country to ensure that everyone have a better life. It's almost like a double memorial service should be held for military personnel that served in this country. The treatment afforded to Black folks. You see, Black Americans appropriately celebrate the valor, bravery, courage of the men and women who have fought and risked their lives for this country. But the history of racial terrorism and violence endured by thousands of Black veterans remain unacknowledged. How do we talk about veterans if we're going to speak highly of the dead, but we don't even acknowledge the racial terrorism and violence that a lot of our soldiers experienced? I just think that's like dying a double death. Mm-hmm. You serve and you come back to this country and you still treat it as if you don't matter. At the same time, while you have, people all over the country saying you can't take a knee, think about our veterans. In the meantime, we have Black veterans dealing with mental health issues who every year you look at maybe the 1,000 or so folks who are, killed by the police, a strong percentage of them are former military personnel who are homeless and dealing with mental health issues.
Yep.
So
yeah,
I just think that's something that we need to take a look at.
Any irony about the whole, people talking about taking a knee and disrespecting the flag. It was a veteran that told Kaepernick to take a knee because he said just sitting down with a towel on your head is disrespectful to veterans, but the taking of the knee is not. It was a veteran that told him, white veteran who was like a Green Beret. He was in special forces, is the one that told him to take the knee. That would be a respectful way to protest. So, it goes to show you that if this argument was about disrespecting the flag, but you've got a majority of veterans saying that's not disrespectful, it wasn't about disrespecting the flag, and it wasn't about what was disrespectful to the veterans. If you've got a majority of veterans saying, hey, this is not disrespectful, and then those that are saying, yeah, I find it disrespectful, but I fought for their right to be able to do that, it was never about the veterans. Like, politicians use veterans like they use anything else. Veterans are convenient when it comes time for a photo op. Veterans are convenient when it comes time for an election strategy, but veterans are not convenient when it comes time to actually taking care of them.
Yeah. And everybody knows. I mean, that was just deflective chatter. Everybody knows what taking the knee was about, but it's just like when a black person gets shot down by the police and they have a record for jaywalking, and folks start yelling, "Well, he was a criminal."
But you know
You
what,
know,
Rob? Even though everybody may know, I think the danger in that is a strong percentage of white Americans don't know.
Hmm.
That's the scary part. On the job, I know at City Hall, in the mayor's office. I mean, and I'm not saying that because I'm not there. I'm just saying there was tension even then because they were like, well, what about the veteran? Well, what about our veterans? You're talking about black athletes who took a knee. Many of them had black uncles, fathers, grandfathers who served in the military, who fought, in just about every war that we've had in this country, going back to God knows when. So it's kind of like they assume that everybody just showed up one day and it was just white people preserving the honor and integrity of America. And I think that's the concern because I don't think it's not even just political. We have a lot of people because we don't talk about this type of stuff publicly, and we very rarely address these issues publicly. I think a lot of them are in dire need of re-educating, just like a lot of our folks are in dire need of re-educating and reprogramming because
yeah,
they
well,
only know what they were taught. I use Memorial Day as an example only because Memorial Day. I remember being a kid in middle school, and I'm in the marching band. Yes, Anif, I played the trumpet. And sixth, seventh, eighth grade, ninth grade, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, we're marching in the Memorial Day parade every year. We had no idea the role that black veterans played in the military because we were just never ever taught. We're honoring them on Memorial Day. It's a holiday. I don't care who recognizes that day and who celebrates and remembers fallen veterans on that day. But just to know that it was black folks after all the suffering, all the trauma they went through, that took the time to start off such an incredibly important tradition on American soil.
Hmm.
yeah,
So I dig what you're saying, Rob, but I'm just to add to it, it's just like again, it's even double. The terrorism and the violence that they experienced when they came back from these wars wearing their uniforms proudly. They just served. My
yeah.
dad was a mechanic. They were out there in the middle of the battles, keeping them vehicles moving and burying people and dragging dead bodies off the field. And they were doing the worst jobs alongside of aiming their rifle and shooting at individuals who had never done them any wrong. It's like
Yeah.
dying a double death. And it's the thing that we don't talk about in this country. And I would love to see the members of the Congressional Black Caucus addressing that and bringing that to the nation's attention on the
They
political.
won't.
Yeah, we can't say they won't because we've never asked them.
What, what have they done? They've been around since what, 65? That's a whole nother conversation. What was it, like 55 members of the Congressional Black Caucus? You go on their website. Well, I don't know if we want to deviate off
No, I'm
off
not
our
going to go
topic.
there. I think that's a good
So
conversation for the future. I don't know if you agree or disagree. I think that's a great conversation. I would
Oh
love to.
no, it's definitely a great conversation for the future.
Personally, I think they've done a lot, going all the way back to Adam Clayton Powell and the rest of them. You can do that, but if you've never researched to see what they've accomplished in the bills and the legislation that they actually pushed across their table, so I just hope everybody comes prepared and ready to talk about it because there's some good stuff that I would love to share in regards to black legislators on the national level over the last 50 years. But today we're talking about Memorial Day. Anything else we want to talk about in regards to Memorial Day and the celebration? I do encourage people to, recognize and pay homage to our ancestors who fought, bled, and died on the battlefields. Pay homage to our ancestors, or our family members and ancestors who put on that uniform, for whatever reason. Doesn't matter if because there were no jobs available and they joined the military. Doesn't matter. They put on those uniforms and they went out there to serve. And I think we should pay homage. I think it's important that we pay homage and remember our ancestors who fought, bled, and died. Hanif, your dad was in Korea with my pops.
And I had two uncles that were in Vietnam.
yeah, my dad was in Vietnam. My grandfather was in World War II. I mean, yeah, we definitely got to pay homage, but we have to teach our kids. We have to teach ourselves, Black history. I mean, this is real Black history because everything is centered on white history. White people are like, oh, we built this country. No, you didn't build this country. Black people built this country. When you all came over to this country, it was just forests and woods. There were no roads, there were no buildings, there were no structures, nothing. Black people built this country. But because of history and what they're taught in the schools from elementary all the way on up, is that they built this country. And you've seen and heard the rhetoric countless times. We built America, we built this country. No, I'm sorry to tell you, son, we did.
Yeah,
So
I'm sorry you weren't done, Rob.
no, go ahead, Anif, go ahead.
The one thing I do want to say is that regardless of what anyone feels about the military, whether you got a lot of people I know, at least at least a lot of people that when I was growing up, when Boys in the Hood came out, that were acting like they were Furious Styles. Black man has no place in the military. Whether you believe that or not is irrelevant. What is relevant is that if you didn't put on that uniform and go out and do what was being done, you have no right, in my opinion, to disrespect that uniform. You can respectfully disagree with whether it's a relevant choice or not, but that's a sacrifice that people have gone out and done, and that's something that if you've never walked in those shoes before, you might want to, before you open your mouth to say something negative and try to tear it down, you might want to do a little bit of research first. I have my own personal feelings about the military and Black people's place in it, but the one thing I do feel, regardless of my opinions, is that our veterans need to be honored. They need to be respected. And the people that are in the uniform right now, that are in there for the right reasons and everything like that, they don't deserve to be disrespected either. They made a choice that very few people in this country made. And I just think that they deserve to be honored for that choice.
I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. I just want to also add, it's very rare that you see Black people disrespecting people in the military. I think most folks may question our role fighting for a country that seems to be in the middle of a perpetual war with Black Americans or Black people across the globe. So I think people question the role, but it's very rare that you'll see us dishonoring people who fought, bled, and died. I mean, I may have missed those conversations, but I know the conversation. I'm dealing with folks from the more extreme militant, portion of America. And I mean, I very rarely hear people, those people are sellouts. Nah, it's kind of like, why would you fight a war? On April 28th, 1967, with the United States at war in Vietnam, Muhammad Ali refused to be inducted into the armed force, saying, I ain't got no quarrel with the Viet Cong. On June 20th, 1967, Ali was convicted of draft evasion, sentenced to 5 years in prison, fined $10,000, and banned from boxing for 3 years. He stayed out of prison as his case was appealed and returned to the ring on October 26, 1970. The point is, to your point, Hanif, would I go back in time and argue with Muhammad Ali for not going to Vietnam?
No.
My dad, we used to have, at my house, all we did was debate. We did nothing but debate. And he would defend his stance on joining the career, joining the military and going to Korea. At the time, it had a lot more to do with access to employment opportunities. We talk about it's difficult for us to build capital and wealth and equity in this country. It was even worse. It was even worse for them. So he would talk about that. Well, what would you have done? You could say it, but you didn't have to walk in those shoes. And I get him. He's absolutely correct. I think the bigger question is, what is our role at a time when we're still talking about, watching since George Floyd's murder, we've watched about 8 or 9 other murders. And we watched the entire country support what took place. We watched our military step back while white extremists bombarded the Capitol and attempted to take over the country. No military involvement. But then at the same time, we see National Guard and other military troops out in certain portions of this country today. They would have no problems bringing in the Army, the Marines, or whoever to quell any type of attempted insurrection by Black people. So when we look at our military, we know that military, they have always used military to stomp us and hold us down and prevent us from growing and spreading. Goes back to Birmingham, it goes back to Tulsa. I mean, they've always used the military. So I think we should always question our role. We should always question our role in America. That's just my belief. I hear what you're saying, but you do not denigrate those who have given their lives, sacrificed their life, put that uniform on. Then I get defensive because now you're talking about 2 of my brothers. You talk about my dad, just about all of my uncles, great uncles, number of cousins. So I dig you.
Yeah, I mean that's all I'm trying to say with that, because it's like it's really easy to comment on something that you've never lived. It's real easy to have something to say, be it positive or negative, in something that you don't have any firsthand experience with. But when you have firsthand experience with it, it's it's not. I think sometimes we as people, and when I say we as people, I'm not just talking about Black people. I'm talking about American public in general. We have this really great habit, especially with the advent of social media and and all those brave keyboard warriors out there that are brave online, but meek and mild in person. We have this habit of wanting to talk about and say things that we don't really know anything about, or that we're not really educated about, and want to make it as if certain things are so cut and dry when there's so many things that aren't as cut and dry as we think they are. There's a lot of nuance in some of these issues, and if we're not willing to really look at that nuance, whether it's from a firsthand perspective or a research perspective, we got to be careful what we say, and we got to be careful what we do.
Give me. I hear what you're saying, and I'm a very opinionated person, so I'm going to say, give me an example of what you mean by that.
All right, perfect example. This leads us into another topic that we said we wanted to talk about today.
Okay.
Perfect example: the arts and music. All right, there's 2 facets of this conversation. So during COVID-19, a lot of musicians, artists, and everyone lost work because of COVID. So this nation talked about all this money it's invested into the arts, and to try to make sure that the arts are safe. But the money actually never went to any of the artists; it went to agencies. So when I as an artist say, no, they didn't do anything to save the arts. What do you mean? They gave this money. They gave $135 million to the National Endowment of the Arts to distribute it out. Everything. Well, it only went to the same 12 agencies in every state that the National Endowment of the Arts gives to every year. It didn't actually go to any of the artists that need help, that can't pay their mortgages. It went to organizations that already have all this operating income. And some of these organizations didn't even need it. Then the other aspect of the arts when I'm talking about this is when I hear people say, and this in this case are some of our young Black people that will say about jazz, which is an art form that I play a lot. Oh man, that's old. I don't need to appreciate that. I've even heard some say, man, that's white people music. No, it ain't. You don't even know the first thing about the music to say is white people music. Just because it's not on your popular radio station doesn't mean it's white people music. That's like also saying classical music. Oh, that's white people music. Man, you don't know a thing about classical music history to know how many Black people, both back then in Europe and today in America, have been involved in the music. So it's like it's a very nuanced kind of thing. And if you don't understand from a practitioner standpoint or I've done any research about it, you don't even know what you're talking about. Like you don't. So you better be careful about what you're saying and how you're saying it, because you may be doing, I'm gonna call it this way, you may be doing a Donald Trump. You may be sitting out there putting out a bold-faced lie, just to put out a bold-faced lie.
Well, what they say about lies, if you tell it enough times, it becomes the truth, right?
Yeah, well, for some people it do. And I think it's important to kind of say it that way because, we've said this statement, this next statement on this show a lot. Black people are not a monolith. So even to another question that's part of our conversation today, which we really have to make time to get to, about Black men and loving Black women. There's a really interesting line when it comes to that, and it's like, when I hear some women say, "Oh man, Black men are dogs," so my response is, "So every single Black man on the face of the earth?" Well, no. Well, Black men are dogs. Okay, so what are you basing that off of if you don't know every single Black man on the face of the earth? Well, my man did this, that, and the other, and then he did this, and then the man I had did this, that, and the other, and he did this, and they're all dogs. Every one of y'all are dogs. I'm like, well, you don't even know me, so how are you gonna tell me I'm a dog? Just because you're attracted to the same kind of guy that keeps doing the same kind of thing doesn't mean that all Black men are dogs. So it's kind of like there's layers of nuance to a lot of these things. So we have to be careful with generalizations.
Yeah. And I think the flip side is, I think all of us as educators in our own right, we have to do a better job of being able to educate the masses. As we talk about jazz music, we could say the same thing for other genres of black music, whether it's blues, for those folks who still listen to the that Bayou music. There's so many different aspects of music and culture. There are people who say that poetry, oh man, that joint's whack. I would never. I dig it. But once you educate them on it, you get them involved, and you kind of make it an environmental part of a cultural environment. They begin to accept it. Um, so I hear what you're saying about music, but I think we have to do a better job. When I know I love jazz, I can't play, I dig it, but I love jazz. We try and incorporate it into the poetry. We bring in jazz from organic soul, from all the events we've done. We've always tried to find a way to infuse jazz because I love it. But I also know that dealing with a lot of musicians, I think some of the folks that I've come across are some of the most artistically arrogant people I've ever met in my life. So if their art form is dying out, or not even dying out, their art form is not being appreciated by young blacks, not even just young blacks, young adults, middle-aged black folks, it's because we have the general attitude when it comes to jazz. Listen, you wouldn't understand this, or jazz is da da da. We make it seem like this, like it's trying to learn how to speak Chinese or something. And most people present it. Me and Hashima used to debate about this. They would always take jazz and frame jazz as if it's this complex form of music, but refuse to address its humble beginnings of folks playing in the bayous and the delta and juke joints and how it evolved into what it is now. It was just people making music. So when I think of jazz, I'm still thinking of modern day rhythm and blues. Some of the same elements. You can speak on that. I can't. I'm not a jazz musician, but I think it's in terms of how we present it and the fact that we rely on everybody else to educate us on our culture, music, art, literature, all that stuff included. We allow everybody else. It goes back to what Rob says. They won't teach us, or they won't, or they don't. And I think 2021, we have all these resources at our disposal. And I think sometimes we need to take advantage of people's sweeping generalizations and use those as teachable moments and educate them and draw them into what we do. And I'm not pointing at you. I'm saying as much as I love jazz and poetry and everything, I love literature. We all collectively have to do a better job of pulling our community in and getting them to the point where they're just acculturated with our culture, with our music, with our art forms, our politics, everything that we do. Because we don't.
I mean, even in the statement you just said, it's like the way I look at it this way. I said this to a class I taught last year, and I said this to some private students recently. I said, one of the best things and the worst things at the same time to ever happen to jazz is academia. Mm-hmm. And one of the best things, because of academia, the access to learning it has become so much broader, and it's not just at the college level anymore. You've got stuff as early as 4th, 5th, and 6th grade for some people. So it's been really good in that respect. But it's also one of the worst things, because anytime academia gets a hold of something cultural and puts it as a major or something, they set a framework around it that isn't always conducive for the art form or the cultural issue that they've now put in their institution. And now all of a sudden, because if you think about the beginnings of jazz and academia, they had no choice in the beginning but to hire the musicians that were making this music, that were creating the music, that were the progenitors, the impresario, the people that were pushing this music forward. They didn't have a choice, because you didn't have a whole lot of people that were educated in the music. But once they started issuing a lot of these advanced degrees, man, there are jazz legends out there that know more in their pinky about this music than 500 PhDs will ever do in their lifetime. And some of those folks can't get a job, at a university in Iowa because they don't have a master's degree or doctorate. And it's kind of crazy because in that respect, they put a piece of paper, a paper credential over actual real life experience. But that's also the game of academia. It's not just in jazz. And it's not just in the arts. It's also like that in history. It's also like that all over because of the way the structure of academia is. So the thing we have to look at when we start talking about some of these things and how do we re-educate ourselves in our communities is first, the onus is on ourselves. Are we willing to first educate ourselves? If we're not willing to educate ourselves about our own culture, then what hope do we have to educate our own community?
Can I respond to that?
You sure can.
It's hard to educate yourself on something that you have no idea exists. It's hard to educate yourself on something if you know everything you know about jazz comes from these people who frame it as if it's so complex that it has nothing to do with you. Well, at what point do you realize this is something I need to learn about? I'm gonna flip it, and I say the onus is really on those folks who do know. I'm a student of history. I love history, particularly Black history. So if I take this information with me to my grave and I don't share it, who benefits? Something as simple as Memorial Day, talking about that, and kind of getting people to talk about these simple conversations like that, and just to see what comes out of it. If we don't do due diligence and make that happen, then whose responsibility is it? Someone who's never learned anything about Black history in their life is not going to wake up one day and say, wow, I think I need to learn about the role of the Blacks in the military. They just think that it has nothing to do with them. I look at what's happening in the gospel. Well, praise and worship now. By the time all is said and done, people will have no idea that the basic roots of American gospel music originated on a slave plantation. And how? By the time the academics get done with it, it's not going to be some old the hum, the foot stomp, the hand clap. They're going to be talking about all these complex melodies and verses and how to, it has to be properly framed. And if it's not constructed in such a way, eventually the people whose ancestors created that art form won't even be able to relate to it. And that's kind of like what happened with jazz. And if I can't relate to it because I've never been taught about it, how do I wake up one day and educate myself on it?
I mean, you're watering it down and you're whitening it up.
Well, to be blunt, you said that you talked about the roots of like American gospel music with the slave plantation. No, to be blunt, the roots of all American music, hear me, for all of y'all watching that think that I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm a college professor that teaches this. The roots of every single form of American music come from the plantation. I don't gamble, but I put a challenge to any one of my students. You can show me one form of American music that didn't come out of plantation, that didn't come out of slavery. I'll give you $100. No one's been able to get that $100.
Well, let me
it's a long time now.
Let me get $20 on that bet too, because I want to hear them come up with
it. because I mean, we could just do a quick 30 seconds to prove this. All right.
Yep.
Heavy metal. How could that have come from the plantation? Well, heavy metal is a derivative of rock and roll. Rock and roll came from Black folks. Rock and roll is a derivative of rhythm and blues, which is a derivative of jump band music, which is a derivative of jazz music, which is a derivative of blues, which is a derivative of spirituals, which is a derivative of slave songs. So there's no form of American music that didn't come from the plantation, including country.
Yeah.
Boom. There you have it.
Yeah. So I was going to talk about the co-opting of Black art forms, but I guess you just summed it up in a 2-minute statement.
No, but we should because here's the thing. Because there's something I want to say about that. Like a lot of us don't understand. Like a lot of people don't understand when it comes to specifically about hip hop. A lot of people don't understand that, when it started, it really started more on the lines of being the source of news in the community. It was a way to broadcast the things that you would never see on your nightly news. It was a way to tell things that you would never be able to tell otherwise. And it was a way to not only be, entertained, but it was a way to be educated. When Public Enemy got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, one of the things that Chuck D said, which was rather interesting, he said he's been told over the years, by hundreds of people that number one, they didn't know college was an option for them until they heard Chuck D. And number two, that more people that have listened to his music decided to go to a historically Black college because they didn't know how many of them existed until they listened to Public Enemy. So, these are the things that hip hop did. And in the beginnings of hip hop, the record labels, like all the big record labels that were not black owned, didn't think it was going to be successful until they started seeing it as $1 billion industry. They had nothing to do with it. But once they saw how much money it could make, here's what people don't understand. You sign a record deal, there's only maybe about 5 artists in all of hip hop that have 100% control over what they can say that's signed to a major label. Specifically, I'm dealing with major labels.
I can only think of Master P.
But Master P has his own. But that's the thing.
That's right. He owns his own. He's outside.
He has his own. And even though his distribution was through a major, his deal was. But Master P was smart. What Master P did is he showed them, listen, you partner with me, I'm gonna make you money because I'm already making millions of dollars without you. But I have control over my stuff, not you. You're just distributing. I'm the one making it. But there's only about 5 artists signed to a major label that have creative control. There was a documentary about a decade or so ago in which they were talking to all these different rappers that were going to these exhibitions and trying to get a deal signed. And one guy said that each time he goes through, they want to sign him, but each time they tell him he's got to talk about some gangster stuff. He's got to talk about bitches and hoes. He's got to talk about drugs, and he don't want to do that.
Narrative, yeah.
So
and that ties into when you say these multinationals begin to invest into rap music. What was also happening with rap music at the time that they decided to take over was those folks were influencing the mindset of America. I mean, in a positive way. There was no gangster rap. You had the cats that were extreme. They were the cats on the periphery. The rest of these dudes was dropping jewels, talking about books. You want to talk about Malcolm X making the autobiography of Malcolm X, hitting the top New York Times bestseller list again after about 40 years. There were things there was movement happening with their music. So the co-opting of rap music wasn't just about money. It was also about control of a narrative.
That's what I'm getting to, because even when you look at the first album that they truly consider gangster rap, which was NWA's first album, if you listen to NWA's first album, it's not talking about what we typically talk about, what we typically think of as gangster rap. A lot of their first album was just telling the rest of the world stuff that was going on where they were that people were not aware of. Man, half the world, half of the people on the East Coast ain't even never heard of. I don't even say more than half of the people on the East Coast, they never heard of Compton before NWA.
Yeah.
And they didn't know about some of the things going on with Compton. So when you hear a song like Fuck the Police, man, it's not, what it's really about and what is and the reason why they wrote that song, man, it's not what people try to twist it into. And I think that's really the point of when it was taken over. It was taken over for commercial viability and also to regain control of the narrative, because that narrative control was slipping when these labels were black owned.
Absolutely. And then when you talk about the original gangster rap, man, you really got to take it back before NWA, bro.
Ice-T.
No, I know, but what I'm saying, what we recognize, what people,
I dig what you're saying. It's just my heart just won't let it slide. I gotta bring up cats like Just Ice. There was a bunch of cats back. I remember just them cats was like,
oh, I know.
Oh,
Schoolie D.
Schoolie D, all them cats. So that's all. I'm not challenging what you're saying because you're absolutely right in terms of public perception. But before then, that's what I'm saying. Those cats were really on the periphery and when NWA came in, think about the labels that they were signed with and who owned them. So I dig what you're saying 100%. So I just think, as a collective, we have to do a better job. It boils back down to controlling our narrative. Everything we've been saying since we started, control of the narrative is everything, and we have to do a better job instead of using it to create dissension amongst folks in our community, within the arts community, within the social activism community. We need to take narrative and just really, I think it's the only way to get people on code. We have to control our narrative. So I agree with everything you're saying. And it breaks my heart every time I hear somebody say, nah, jazz music, that stuff is whack. Until they hear Coltrane. There's a couple of joints I can play right now. And then it's like you just play it and they just, yo, what is that? And it's like, yeah, that's.
And then you mentioned Coltrane, but here's the thing most people don't know. So Eric, I say Eric being Rakim, and most of the people that are like my son's age,
Yep.
like, who's that? I'm like, oh my God, you poor child. But Rakim himself said in an interview, because everyone looked at his flow and they talked about how his flow was so unique. And he was like, they were like, how did you get that flow? Like, nobody had a flow like you did, and during your prime and during your heyday. Where did you get that from? And he said, well, growing up, I was playing the tenor sax, and my favorite tenor saxophonist is John Coltrane. So a lot of my flow is just transcribing, the way Coltrane kind of weaved in and out when he was improvising, and applying that to rap music. So it's like, you say that, and his whole idea as to how he flowed and put his lyrics together came from listening to jazz.
Yeah.
The whole freestyle spirit, taking all these different sounds and blending them, bruh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be jazz. The way they made that piano talk to the drummer, and the drummer's talking to whoever else, and it's like, before you know it, you talked about before, you talk about putting all these different elements together. And it's like, but being able to do that with a natural air, it's like, bruh, when they hear certain songs, people just stop. It's like when you hear a 19-year-old stop and they're listening to the Temptations or the stair steps, the 5 stair steps or something. You're like, well, what do you know about that? How do you know about Al Green? Nah, my parents used to play it. Okay.
Yeah, and some of these cats don't even realize, especially like with hip hop, a lot of those beats, they just pulled it right from 70s R&B.
Man, they pulled it from all types of albums. They were grabbing old albums and anything that
had
a beat or something. So it's kind of like, I dig what you're saying, and I think we have to do a better job of making sure that it connects. Because right now we're leaving the responsibility of, them forming that connection based on what they're learning from mainstream. You have white boys who, oh my God, I'm a hip hop historian. I can tell you the history. And it's like, yeah, but you can study
You never
soul.
lived it.
You can study soul all day long, but I'm telling you, it's one of them things you can't replicate. You have those Korean pop boys. They can replicate every note that Minnie Riperton makes, every note she sings, but you don't feel it. You cannot. You can observe it. You can study it. You can conduct experiments on it. There's something about soul, something about what them folks did back then, and even what they do now. When them cats were, grabbing old break records and snatching just 10-second beats and creating entire new genres out of it, dude. That's something you can't. That's like a spiritual connection, an artistically spiritual connection that you can't teach. It's one of those things we have to play for them and tell them, just sit down, just listen for a minute. Shh. Just listen. You gotta be like my man Darius Lovehall and Love Jones. Just shh. Just listen. It's, you gotta hear it. Jazz is one of them things. To let somebody sit there and give me a lecture or a dissertation on it, yeah, I'm done. I don't want to hear it. But it's different. Dude, you pick up your trumpet and start playing. I don't think I've ever heard you play. And you know me at venues, I'm always running around. I'm like, I gotta sit and listen. And it's like, once you hear it, it's a wrap. And that's the beautiful thing about our culture. From the food, I look at what cats are doing with these vegetarian meals and the way they're hooking them up. Oh my God. I don't do veggies. But the way it's like, what is that?
No, yeah. But even what you were talking about with the lecturing, I think if someone is lecturing you about jazz or culture and it's like, I don't want to hear that, they're not doing a good job. They're not getting, you may never, I've been to lectures and I may have only gotten hooked by one thing and the rest of it I may be like, ugh. But like, if you're telling the truth about like the music and really giving it from a different from the perspective that it should be given, like you're really learning something new. Like, I think a lot of people don't realize, like, especially when we start talking about like jazz history, like some of the earliest songs, like first off, people didn't even understand the word jazz, where it came from, the negative connotation of the word, and how most of the early jazz musicians didn't call the music jazz and couldn't stand it being called jazz. That's a whole nother conversation. But like, even in that, like some of the earliest songs about protest and racial injustice come from like 1910, So like sometimes like when we have this wave of socially conscious songs, I'm like, dude, that's not new. Like it's not new at all. It's not only is it not new, but like black artists doing it, it's not new at all. And I think when it comes to the lecturing side of it, I think like I think we need a little bit of everything. I think we need the lectures to get to the people that's how they get it, and I think we need the demonstration for the people that's how they get it. But I know we're running short on time, but there's something I really want us to make sure we talk about before we get done with this conversation.
Let me just get this last thing and we could flip it right over. Well, now you made me forget what I was going to say. Oh, the dissertation, the lectures. It's different. If I'm coming from you and you're passionate about what you do, you got that soulfulness. It's just there. When you start talking, there's a rhythm to what you're saying. We learn different. I can't listen. I failed jazz theory at Southern Connecticut. Yeah, Rob, I failed the class. I failed jazz theory. It was the worst class. I thought it was going to be easy. I love jazz. My dad
I
did.
failed music history
But
because
I
it was
couldn't
an
listen.
810.
The way they broke it down, dude, I just stopped going to class. It was just a waste of my time. So I think that's why I say it goes back to those of us who know have an obligation to teach. The other thing, we talk about rap music. People don't understand, like, there's all these arguments about where rap came from. Remember what rapping was when we were kids? Rapping was, yo, bro, I'm gonna go rap. You gonna go rap to that girl? It's about using tape. It's about wordplay and being so smooth and slick with your words. It's like, oh man, I want to go rap to her, but I don't know what to say. Oh man, come on, man, you gotta be smooth with it. It's this way of utilizing your words, like Urban Dictionary calls it gibberish. We called it ebonics. There was a million words for it. But y'all remember what rapping was? I know y'all old enough to remember, right? When we were kids back in the 70s, those of us old enough to listen to our uncles talk. So I just want to throw it out there, for all these young hip hop heads, just go on YouTube, man. Listen to old cats talk about what things were then and what they called it. And then let's get down to this last topic. We're at that 1 hour mark, man, and that's partly my fault. I got on my soapbox today. That last topic, what was it?
The black men loving black women.
Do we love them enough? A lot of conversations about whether or not black men do black men love black women? If yes, what does that love look like? If not, what are the expectations? What are we missing out on? Rob, you had brought it up in the phone conversation earlier. Talk about how that came up, and then let's just get into it briefly.
Yeah, so basically I was in a Facebook group and they were talking about that just as you illustrated as you read it. And my response was black men do love black women. I think what we need to do is get away from the white supremacist narrative that's trying to depict us that we're not, and get on the right narrative, because certain statistics will tell you, 92% of black women are with black men, married to black men, and 85 to 86, 87% of black men are married to black women. But if you listen to the narrative out there, or if you're just following certain entertainers or certain athletes, it almost looks like that number is in the single digits. So personally, I feel that they are, but that machine keeps working and grinding a narrative out to create a schism between black men and black women, and that's coming from every single angle, 360 degrees.
But I think to really accurately answer this question, you also have to ask, what does it mean to love someone? Because for some people, they don't feel like, and I mean, how do I want to say this? It's like, what's that guy's name? The guy that be just like brutal with all these women.
Kevin Samuels.
Yes. Like if you listen to what he says sometimes, like some of the stuff he's like, I've listened to him a couple of times. Like I've had people send me stuff. What do you think? What do you think? Like most of the time, like 95% of what he's saying is 100% true. How he says it, that's up to individual preference. But a lot of the times, people's expectation of love is unrealistic. They think, well, if you really love me, you won't spend $10,000 on that ring. Why would I want to spend $10,000 on a diamond ring when I could put a down payment on some property or some assets that are going to make money for my family? What does love really mean? Because for some people, love, like we don't have a universal. We don't have a universal definition that we all accept of what love is. For some people, you can have a man that is there for you, thick and thin throughout everything. But if he's not buying you the latest fashion, you won't say he doesn't love you. Or you could have a woman on the flip side You can have a woman that's there for a man, thick and thin, but if she's not meeting whatever expectation he's looking for, he might say, well, you don't love me. So like, I think like from my standpoint, I see that black men love black women. To sit there and start cherry picking and saying, well, black men want to go to white women all the time. And half the time when I've heard a black woman say something like that, and I'm not trying to pick on all black women, and I'm being very specific. I've heard some black women say this to me in conversation about, well, all you black men want white women, but you married to a white guy, so why are you talking? Like you can't talk to me about this subject when you married to a white person and you want to sit there and talk about like black men don't go to black women. And so it's like we're real quick to make these sweeping generalizations, and we got to be real careful about that, because out of all the black men I personally know, and I know a lot of black men, I only know 2 out of probably like 80, 85, 100 black men that I personally know that prefer white women. So,
you want to comment on that? Next.
Yo, after the show, I'm driving to your house, man. Yeah, it's obviously with Daryl's comment. I've been there and done that. It's been probably over a decade since I've done that. Yo, my phone is texting. My phone's zigging right now, man. I was in trouble. So, but seriously with that, I mean, that's always been an issue I've had. I mean, I've dated white women in the past and so forth, and then it's interesting because, Hanif, in your example, the guys that that prefer white women, they might know. Do they know each other and they kind of hang out with each other?
No, they don't know each other at all.
Okay. Cats that do that tend to congregate with other cats.
But hold on, but I'm going to interview this because this might influence what you're about to say. But they both have one thing in common. The one thing that they have in common is that the black women that they have dated have said, you act too much like a white boy, you too white for me, or something in that vein, which made them want to say, you know what? All right, whatever, I'm done.
I haven't necessarily had that said to me, but I've had it said in a different way. Oh, you speak too proper, or you don't drink, or you don't smoke. I'm like, well, so there's reasons why I don't do that. But guys that typically will date or have a preference outside of their race, they tend to congregate with each other. And some of the things that I've seen in my past is that when they congregate with each other, they're downing black women, which is something I never ever did, and I didn't agree with that. And I usually, interceded and said something, and I wouldn't hang out with those cats. And some of these cats, and I'm not saying all of them, may have had a bad experience or been shunned by a black woman and weren't shunned by a white woman. My personal experience, white women tend to be a little bit more aggressive. They see you, they want you, they buy things for you, they do things for you, and I think that might be attractive or appealing to black men. But at the end of the day, not having a black woman to talk to, understand the struggle, understand what you're going through, be able to have conversations, and they can understand without even saying anything. Being just vibing off each other, just being able to look at each other, and you'd be like, and you see that I know what you mean, she knows what I mean. You're not going to get that. I mean, Tina Marie had Rick James for a minute, but you're not going to get that from from the other races.
But I also think some of this comes down. Some of this is also about and this is not even gender specific, because you can find this with men towards women and women towards men. When it comes to the idea of love and relationships and things like that, there is a big double standard for some people. If someone says, well, I'll give you a real life example from a conversation I had recently. Someone was talking to me about having their standards, and it's okay for a man or a woman to have standards. I said, but here's my thing about that. If you yourself can't measure yourself up to the standards you're holding him to, then those aren't standards. Those are situational ethics. Those are things that's okay for you to say you must do, but you don't have to live. So some people, like, their standards are unrealistic, not because what they're asking is unreasonable, but it's unrealistic because they themselves won't live up to it. And they don't want to deal with that. And when you interject that into the conversation, well, these are my standards. Why are you trying to measure me against my standards? Because you're the one that put them out there. So if you're going to put a standard for what a relationship is supposed to be and you're not living it first, that's not a standard.
You sound like Kevin Samuels right now.
No, but you know who he sounds like, D?
$1,000 man when you make $20,000.
Yo, D,
You don't own a car, but you want a man with a Mercedes? Yo, you live in the projects, but you want a man who have a mansion. Nah, girl, you need to go back home. It's like, woo. I hear you. Go ahead, Rob.
No, yeah, that sounds like a mutual friend of ours. His standard is, he likes his girls to be in shape. And we had a dinner and dialogue, which it almost caused a riot when he said that. And but he stays in shape. He's a Marine and he works out and he stays in shape. So what's the problem of him wanting to be with a woman or date a woman who's in shape? So when you talk about those standards, yeah, those standards are out there. I think social media plays a negative role by pumping out this false imagery, how people should look like. I remember I was at a spot in Glastonbury, and this lady next to me, she definitely had fake butt implants in there. I mean, it really looked really ridiculous. And she wasn't black, and everybody was like looking at him, but it was kind of like, I'm like, that shit don't look right. But what's crazy is, I'm going to quote something that Tariq Nasheed said on one of his things, is when he talked about women getting lip injections, collagen, breast implants, butt implants, and talked about how saw some black men said, "Oh, Spanish women got this, Spanish women got that," but he goes, "I've been to Spain a bunch of times, and I never seen those women over there like that." All these women want things that black women naturally have. I know I butchered up his quote, but he was basically saying all these enhancements that these women are getting, non-black women, are things that black women naturally have. Right. And we need to appreciate that instead of looking towards the Kardashians and their fake bodies.
I mean, but it goes to the point is when we talk about black love and yes, I believe that majority of black men love black women, but we also have to be realistic with one another when it comes to what our standards are, what a relationship goals look like. Because to me, the idea of oh man, our relationship's gonna be we're gonna contribute equally 50-50. That's a lie. You can never have equal contribution. You're not the same. Even if you made the same amount of money, somebody's check is going to get them benefits taken out. There's not equal contribution. What there is, though, is equal sacrifice, and that's between you and your lady, you and your wife, whatever your situation. That's between the two of y'all. The problem that happens in some relationships is that when what's supposed to be just between the two of y'all is between the two of y'all and everybody girlfriends else, or the two of y'all and the homies, and 9 times out of 10, when they trying to give you advice that violates this agreement the two of y'all have made, these are people that are miserable, people that ain't never had a successful relationship or been divorced 15 times. They think they like, what's her name from the soap opera? Erica Kane, been married like 55 times, and trying to tell you what it means to be successful.
Everybody get that.
So it's like, my thing is like, we have to take out expectations that aren't even ours in the first place, because some of the expectations that people put out here on social media, or that I've heard people say like face to face, I'm like, do you really want that, or do you want that because so and so said that this is what's important in a man, or because so and so said this is what's important in a woman? Like, what are your actual expectations? What are your standards? And if you have this standard, do you hold yourself to it? Because if you don't hold yourself to it, there's a word for that. It's called a hypocrite. And you got to be careful with that.
Sometimes we have this way of it's crazy when it comes to black people and dating. it's kind of like we don't think about shared values and shared expectations and understanding of just
Don't you think
understanding.
that's a broad statement?
Say it again.
Don't you think that's a broad statement you're making?
Well, it is, but I just based on my experience, I put it like that. Feel better now.
Yeah,
I
I
think
do.
sometimes we don't take all those variables into consideration. It's crazy if you're coming from a middle class background and you meet a girl, she's fly, but her background is completely different. Value sets, priorities are completely different. Sometimes our lifestyles are just aren't compatible, and they're just not conducive. And we get into relationships that often go awry, and it's kind of like you end up, leaving relationships, you jump to another, and you're trying to find someone that fits, that kind of fits that mold. And I think people confuse that with black men not wanting to be with black women and vice versa. I think we date it's a generalization, but I think sometimes we date for all the wrong reasons and we look for all the wrong things. I'm My dad from Tuscaloosa County, Alabama. My mom was people from the islands. By then, they came here to Harlem. By the time they came to New York. By the time she grew up, yo man, she was like, a New Yorker in terms of her mentality. Her and my dad had a beautiful but a horrible relationship that shouldn't have lasted. It shouldn't have lasted more than 20 years. Their lifestyles just were not compatible. Their backgrounds are different. What they valued and how they valued it, and what they worked for and strived for were completely different. But they forced it and they made it work. Nowadays, people aren't willing to force things to make it work once you find out that your lifestyles just aren't compatible. So
Well, go ahead.
I was gonna say the other piece is when people say, and I mean it's in every time you read an article on black men, they're always saying there's a million things that black men are accused of. And I don't want to sound like I'm defensive for black people. It's for black men. It's just hard to defend yourself sometimes. It's like being accused of a heinous crime. The more you defend yourself, the guiltier you look. So there are no right words to express to someone to let them know that no, I love black women. No, but draw. And it's like you find yourself defending everyone. We're the only group of people where black men and black women are always judged by the worst amongst us and not the best amongst us. I think sometimes we fall prey, as Rob, you've been saying the whole show, we fall prey to everybody else's narrative. To even have a conversation on whether or not we love black women is to say, well, I guess none of us, we grew up and we just hate our mothers, or if you're an interracial, if you have interracial parents, or you just hate your father's grandmother or your father's mother or your mom's, it just makes it seem as if we hate our sisters and our daughters. And it's the furthest thing from the truth. Love is love. Oftentimes, love is unconditional when you really feel like, you're willing to live, do anything to live for someone and you take a bullet to die for them. How do you defend that? It's like every time you read a magazine and you see a Facebook post, how do you convey that to someone? Love is love. I look for, when I think of my mother, when I think of, settling down with someone, I think of my mom, I think of my sister, I think of all those women who helped me to become me. So it's just a hard one to even talk about because I think it's just a crazy conversation to have.
Well,
Yeah.
I was going to say, and I think one of the reasons why it's also a crazy conversation to have is because, we use the word love so casually that for so many people it loses its seriousness. Oh man, I love that restaurant. Oh man, I love that show. Oh man, I love this artist. Oh man, I love that. Do you know what that word really means? Like seriously, do you know what it means when you say that?
Hmm.
It's the same thing like with the word hate. Do you know what that word means when you're using it? So it's like it's a crazy conversation to have. But I think a lot of it also, as it was said earlier, is like social media amplifies so much. And a lot of what it amplifies is the worst of it. I mean, you get, you get someone that'll sit there and say, like, I literally read, it wasn't satire. I literally read a post a couple of weeks ago where a woman said, "Oh man, you so foul for going after your husband to take his kids because I was sleeping with him. The only reason why I had the opportunity to sleep with your husband is because you were first cheating and you were first cheating on him with my husband." I'm like, wait, what? Are you serious? This is serious?
Reality TV bullshit.
I'm like, this is serious. Oh, hey, you wrong for trying to take all his kids away because we just doing what you did first. I'm like this, and this is the stuff that gets amplified.
Yeah, and that's the worst part of it, because they'll take that one scenario and they'll apply it unequivocally across the board to all black people.
That's that monolith.
Yeah. But we'll look at the black family that's been together where the parents have been married 50, 60 years. And, Ray had a good household. It didn't say perfect. I just said a good household. Raised children, got grandchildren, got great-grandchildren, did right by their families. You won't look at that example.
Oh, no.
It's like, it's like when Bill Cosby went to jail, everyone wants to trash the Cosby Show, but I'm like, no, the Cosby Show actually stood for something, and it was an example of something. So, you can say whatever you want about the man, but that example of what was shown was a necessary one. And I think like that's the kind of thing, like we'll amplify the worst and discard the rest. So like this whole thing, like this is a show that I think I think this is a topic that I think we definitely need to cover with an entire show, with some women on the panel, because I think this is a topic that has to be talked about multiple times, because there's a perception that black men don't love black women the way black women love black men. I've heard that. There's a perception that, black people are less concerned with being in a family unit and more concerned with shacking up, which that's a small minority of people. I mean, and a lot of these perceptions, to be blunt, that are generalized about black people and black love, I mean, statistically speaking, are more common with white people, to be honest with you.
Right.
It just statistically is. So, I think it's an important conversation to have, because a lot of the youth of today, at least the ones that I've encountered, the values that they're getting they're getting them from social media, they're getting them from reality TV, they're getting them from music and all these other things that aren't showing them what love really is and what a good relationship really looks like.
Okay.
Yep, I'd have to agree with all that.
I would too. But I do want to say, I can't say all social media. I remember reading Essence, Ebony, and all those magazines back in the day when they were talking about the single black woman and black men not being in the household. And again, not even taking into account the number of black men who are married to black women. Not taking into account the number of black men who may have cohabitated or lived with a black woman that they've been dating for 10, 15, 20 years, raised their kids, just not married. So we never throw that into the data. And tragically enough, you very rarely see black men speaking. That's why, I did Kevin Samuels. People can say what they want, because he's talking about things publicly that we talk about in the barbershop or in small circles. It's very rare that you see black men coming out front and standing up for things that black men believe in, or talking about and defending black men. We don't do that. Everybody does it. We're constantly under attack. Black magazines, white magazines, it's like the easiest thing to talk about is just the character flaws in black men. And I think that we have to do a better job of stepping up. If nobody's going to speak for us, we need to speak up for ourselves. And we don't do that. That's why I did Kwame Brown. If we don't speak up for ourselves publicly, in front of the camera, and let people know that we stand for something, everybody's going to continue to shit on us.
Yeah.
So this is On Deck. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank everybody who tuned in. Mona Jordan Reed, you always riding with us, ride or die. Imogen C is always
She
riding.
used to mind her business.
So, you guys got any closing comments?
I will say that 2 weeks ago when we were on, I made a comment saying that I'm coming after some of y'all to be on the show. I told y'all that I was going to remind y'all. I did not forget. Mona Jordan Reed, you gonna have to get on. I already started working on one person, and she already know who she is. So I'm not gonna shout her out today because she knows she's gonna have to be on the show. But some of y'all got all these great comments, sitting there in the chat. Y'all need to have these great comments on the air because we need to hear more of your vantage point. And we need to know, man. I love how you putting them laughing emojis out there, but listen, ask one of your fellow listeners. I'm coming, and I'm all. And in all seriousness, I'm saying that She said, if Rob's not on. And I'm serious. And the reason why I'm saying this is because this show is called On Deck. And one of the reasons why it's called On Deck is because when you are on deck, you're ready to embark on your mission. And we need more people on deck, and we need other vantage points on deck to make sure that we're getting a more well-rounded picture of our community. We keep saying our community is not a monolith, so we got to show people. So Mona, I'm coming for you. We're going to figure out a topic, and we're going to figure out a date. That's my closing comments.
Oh, there it is.
And my closing comment is we need to have that conversation, that last topic, about how can Black people work together more cohesively. I think we kind of got off on a tangent. I wouldn't necessarily call it a tangent because it was a great conversation. But there's a lot of different topics that we want to talk about and share with you folks, and we're open to suggestions on topics. We want to keep the diversity going with our topics and subject matter. And if anybody wants to be on the show, just let us know and just be ready to speak your mind, like Hanish said. So I know Mona Jordan, she's going to be on the show. I know that's going to happen.
All right.
But great conversation, great topic.
Thank you, sir. Thank you both. And just real quick announcement, on Sunday, June 6th at 6 p.m., there's going to be a screening and conversation on Tariq Nasheed's new movie, docu-film. It's called Buck Breaking. All I'm going to say is
it's heavy.
It's one of them joints. It's a documentary, but it's so non-traditional. It's just phenomenal. You got to watch it. So it's free admission. It takes place Sunday, June 6th at 6 p.m. at Our Journey, 361 Albany Street in Springfield. Then on Sunday, June 27th at 3 p.m., there is a community dialogue with Dr. Umar Johnson. So we have Umar Johnson coming in. It's going to be at the Boys and Girls Club Family Center, 100 Acorn Street. Spread the word. Tell somebody to tell somebody else. July 17th, we have Dr. Scott Whitaker coming in. He's one of the leading naturopathic doctors in the country, well, in our community. So he'll be coming up to speak with folks. He'll be coming to Springfield. That's July 17th. Also on July 17th at the Boys and Girls Club Family Center in the parking lot, we'll have our first annual, and I hate saying first annual, but we will be launching the very first Ida B. Wells Day in the city of Springfield, which is one of them things we're going to try and see if we can get it working with others across the country to make that a nationwide celebration. So just like they did MLK's birthday back in the day, back in the 60s, we're not asking for permission. We're going to celebrate our ancestors, make sure they remember, make sure they know that we do remember them. There's nothing worse than dying a second death. That second death comes from people forgetting who you are and what you contributed to the development of your people. So as you think of Memorial Day, this upcoming Monday, please take the time and remember who you are, how you got here, and remember the people whose shoulders that you stand on every single day. Memorial Day, founded by Black people for everyone in this country. And we need to remember that and wear that proudly like a badge on our shirt. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, this is On Deck. We'll be back next Sunday, 6 p.m. Tell somebody to tell somebody else. Much love, much peace. Much peace to you. Stay Black. We out.
Brothers, listen to me.
God's walked in.